Welcome to Lessons from a Podcaster, a show where we interview podcasters from all around the world and ask them to share their tips, insights, stories, and everything you need to know to grow your own podcast. This show is brought to you by Podsqueeze, the essential tool for any podcaster that wants to take their show to the next level. Let's get started with our host, Tiago.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Lessons from a Podcaster. Today with me, I have John. Hey, John, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Tiago. Glad to be here.
Oh, it's the pleasure is all mine, and I'm excited to learn from you. In 30 seconds, describe your podcast.
Yeah, well, podcast, anything you want to know about sales, marketing, entrepreneurship, leadership, and motivation, we have the world's leading global experts that we interview and they share their insights with you. So if you want to learn anything about sales, marketing, leadership, entrepreneurship, this is the place to be.
Amazing. It's definitely a topic that I think every entrepreneur needs to learn more about. So it's great that there is content around that. One question, like what is your audience size? How many downloads do you normally have, and where can people listen to your podcast?
Yeah, so we're spread across a lot of places. So salespop.net is the website where you can watch the videos, listen to podcasts, read articles. We also have a YouTube channel, and then we extract the audio of our interviews, and they are across all the major podcast platforms, iTunes, Spotify, etc., etc. So our episodes are, they're viewed and listened to by thousands of people each episode. Sometimes we've even had ones that go into the 20, 30, 40,000 listenership. A lot of them are a couple of thousand or maybe 1,000. It just depends on the subject because we do produce
Okay.
like 3 or 4 a week pretty much, so we're
Oh.
producing a lot of content.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, I mean, it's a growing platform, and our YouTube channel has doubled in size over the last year. We nearly have 5,000 subscribers. We have, it's growing rapidly at the moment.
That is amazing. And I think in this interview, I'll definitely ask you a lot of questions on how you were able to get such great traction. But before that, I would love to ask you, how did everything started? Do you remember why you started this podcast and like your first episode?
Yeah, so we had a product blog, and then we were looking at other things to do, and we were migrating the product blog, and that's the time when I said, okay, let's not do a product blog, let's do an online interactive magazine. So it started with an online interactive magazine, and we started doing a couple of the interviews. Originally, I did them with another colleague, and then I took them over myself. And to be honest, it was kind of grew organically, the interview part of it, because we realized that's the part that really has traction, that really people are really interested in. And then, thanks to a colleague of mine, Claudia, she stepped up and then started outreaching around the world to find really fascinating people. So it kind of it's like the best things in life, Tiago. It's like it's kind of started almost accidentally and kind of
Yeah.
morphed into what it is today.
So the main goal of the podcast, is it a lead magnet? Is it just to give back to the community? Is it everything? Like, what is the main goal of it?
The main goal originally, the original goal for it, which remains the same, is that we believe at Pipeliner CRM, both myself and the founder Nicholas Kim, are big believers in education and in altruism and in giving back. And
Mhm.
so the foundation of it was a give back, is to bring quality content to the world, especially to salespeople who are pretty underserved market,
Mhm.
to be perfectly honest. And then we expanded from them, but it still remains today. The essence of the podcast is our give back. It's our way of helping to
Mhm.
educate and bring interesting perspectives, to people on a variety of subjects. It obviously helps us with some brand awareness, and we
Mhm.
sometimes, it sometimes does generate leads for the other side of our business, but we never set it up as a lead
Right.
machine. We really set it up as an altruistic endeavor.
Totally. And do you like measure somehow the impact the podcast has in your brand? Is there a way to measure that? You told me that yeah, there's a few leads sometimes, but branding goes beyond that,
Yeah.
right? So how can one measure that with such a podcast?
It really is kind of it is hard to measure, I have to say, in terms
Hmm.
of, because just like anything else, especially if you're putting it out to the world, it's hard to measure unless you're very very specific in the content that you're delivering. So the ways obviously you can use Google Analytics to measure what's going on in terms of traffic and plays at YouTube, and we look at the statistics on the podcast platforms.
Right.
We use Libsyn, and that gives us a lot
Okay.
of data as well. So there's a lot of data we can track. And then, to be honest, from a brand awareness point of view, I don't invite guests anymore. I don't outreach. We don't outreach anymore. In fact, we spend most of our time fielding incoming requests to be on our
Hmm.
podcast. So a lot of the podcast agencies have us on their list, and they're always pitching new people to
Right.
us. So again, so all these new people that they're pitching to us, and all the people who come on the podcast, they also learn about pipeline or CRM. So they then go off, and they'll refer people to us. Sometimes they'll just promote us because they just think it's a great
Right.
product, and as a give back to us. So
Hmm.
I think podcasting, in many ways, it's a very symbiotic relationship, I think, between you, your guests, and the audience. So and I still think that's evolving in
Hmm.
terms of what it really all means in the long run, and how you actually turn it into something, especially for a business, how you turn it into something maybe a little bit more enduring.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And for us here at Podsqueeze, we also use this, right, this podcast to get to know our customers
Mhm.
and our users and to learn from them. So I guess for you, it's also the same, right? So you're
Yep.
targeting, sales kind of people, and you get to speak with them, which is
Yep.
always great. Um, I'm curious about how you curate your guests. You said that now you have tons of people, and I guess we know 20,000 downloads per episode. A lot of people would be interested in that kind of exposure. How do you curate? Like, how do you find what's the secret to find a great guest, someone that will make your episode really, pop up and get tons of downloads?
Yeah, that's a good question. Now, they don't all get 20,000, so just I want to be clear.
Right, right, right.
uh, how do we get our guests? Well, like I said, originally my colleague Claudia had started an outreach and like started looking for interesting people. And what we mean by interesting people is people who've got, either new ideas or new ways of looking at things. And so she went around the globe. I mean, we've had one guy who lived with the Maasai warrior tribe in the Maasai
Wow.
desert for a year or something, and to teach about efficiency. These very efficient people, clearly, and learning about that. So lots of people like that. We had the guy who was the last person off the plane. If you remember the Miracle on the Hudson, the
Oh
plane that
yeah.
crash
Hmm.
landed on the river there, New York, on the Hudson. So just and so that's what we look for. We always look for people who have an interesting point of view, who have something interesting to say, maybe an interesting angle that they're coming from. Or
Hmm.
we also do a lot of people who've authored books. If you have a book coming out, then we would look at that and we'd say, yeah, this looks
Okay.
interesting to us. But over time now, the podcast agencies have started to learn the kind of people who really make who we
Okay.
like, so they start to pitch the right kind of. So it's become a whole lot easier, to be perfectly honest,
Hmm.
because if you like, just like learning behavior, the podcast agencies have learned who the type of people who we like, so
Right.
that they're sending the right people to us.
Do you communicate with these agencies? Do you tell them what you want, or they just learn by
they
trial
they
and error?
they learned originally by reaching out to us, and then my colleague Claudia works with them a lot, so now they back and forth to them, so they understand the right profile of person.
Mhm.
And yeah, the podcast agencies have made life very very simple for
Yeah.
us, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to pick people. Just try to find someone that has a unique story to tell,
Yeah.
right? And that's what people want. They want unique stories. Tell
Yeah.
me a little bit about a little bit more about your stack. So you said that you use Libsyn, but what do you use to record? Uh, and yeah, tell us about
Yeah.
that.
So this the technology, I have a Shure podcasting mic here,
Hmm.
which I would, it's a great mic. I mean, let's face it, Shure is
Yeah.
about as good as you can get. I didn't always have Shure, but I mean, it's made a big difference. I use an audio interface, Focusrite Scarlett, which helps as well. a Logitech webcam, and then for the recording, I use Restream. I don't know if that's a
Restream.
podcast platform that you're familiar with.
Never
So
heard of. Hmm.
yeah, so Restream, it's for podcasting. It's a very simple platform, works very very well for us. And then we, once the podcast is recorded, we take it and we run it through this product called Podsqueeze,
Hmm.
that you may be familiar with, Tiago,
Yes.
and then we extract it. I mean, and I have to say, I have to shout out to Tiago and your colleague who built this. This is a fantastic product, because beforehand we had somebody who would take the video, who would go through who would transcribe it, or get the transcription,
Right.
then write the descriptions and write all of this stuff. And it's a long process. Thanks to Podsqueeze, it's instantaneous. Everything you get is pretty much instantaneous. And then we use Libsyn for the audio for the distribution platform.
Hmm.
That's basically the tech stack.
Yeah, it's already of course a professional stack, simple, but enough to get a lot of listens.
Hmm.
Tell me now about like growing. I think a lot of podcasters want to grow their podcast, which is extremely hard. You obviously succeeded, and so what are your tips to grow? Like, or what worked best for you to grow your podcast?
Yeah, I think one of the first things is don't expect to be an overnight success, right?
Hmm.
So and don't look at the most successful podcasts out there and think, oh wow, like
Yeah,
I could
I
have
will
a
be the next Joe
million.
Rogan.
Yeah, yeah, forget Joe Rogan. Like Joe Rogan's Joe Rogan, right? Uh, so I would say, and I've seen this a lot lately, Tiago, especially during COVID. A lot of people decided to start podcasting,
Oh yeah.
right? But I think a lot of people run out of steam very quickly. So maybe they do 5, 10, maybe they even get up to 20, and then they discover that maybe it's a little harder than they thought it was to begin with. So I think the first thing is asking yourself, are you ready? Are you prepared to be in it for the long haul? Because it's
Yeah.
not going to happen overnight. It's just like everything else. It's going to be, you're going to have to build it up over time, and you're going to have to go through a period of when your podcast has very few views, very few listeners. You're not getting much feedback. It seems to be demoralizing, but it kind of
Mhm.
builds on itself. And I think the other important thing is once you start your podcast, I think it will evolve because you'll find your voice eventually.
Yeah.
Because I don't think we always have our voice when we start out. Kind of we think we know how
Mhm.
to do it. So I would say the first two things are, number one is make the commitment. If you're going to do it, say, okay, I'm going to commit for 6 months. Say, I'm
Right.
going to 6 months. I'm going to do this. I'm going to
Every
produce.
week release
I'm going to
something.
every
Mhm.
week. I'm going to produce when I'm going to release it. I'm not going to stress too much at the beginning on the viewership. I'm going to learn, and I'm going to learn, and I'm going to take, and I'm
Mhm.
going to adapt as I go. And then
Right.
once you start to feel like, yeah, I'm pretty good at this now, I'm getting good at this, I would then focus on, if you're podcasting yourself, make sure that the subject matter is interesting and up to date. If you're interviewing other people, make sure the other people are interesting. And then the other part too is to start to go out there and publicize your podcast. And some of the ways he's doing
Mm.
it guerrilla style is you go on to other sites, other groups in LinkedIn and places like that, and you see people having discussions on something, and you say, oh, here's an interesting podcast that covers that subject as well.
Right.
So it's a lot of guerrilla. There's a lot of guerrilla marketing, if you like, involved in
Mhm.
building out a podcast and an audience, and then obviously you can do things like YouTube ads and things like that if you
Right.
really want to go down that route. But I would say, first and foremost is be prepared to be in it for the long haul, because
For the long
nothing,
haul. Yeah.
there's, for every overnight success,
There was
and I
years
don't
of
believe there's no real thing as such thing as an overnight success. There are
no.
millions of other ones that failed miserably. So just that's my biggest thing. If you're
Mhm.
if you're really committed to it and you're really going to put the effort into it, then stick at it. But also, don't be afraid to watch yourself back.
Yeah.
Okay,
Learn
that's the thing
from
that a lot
learn
of
from
people will
your
avoid.
mistakes, right? And listen to your own episodes. Make something unique, which is great as well.
Yeah.
The guerrilla marketing is something that is interesting because it can also come up a little bit spammy, right? When you go on Reddit, when you go on these platforms, how do you kind of plug in your episode without sounding too spammy and eventually getting banned?
Yeah, and I think the key to it is that you just don't start going around posting everywhere. You literally only post when it's relevant to the subject, right? So if
Hmm.
say there's a post on LinkedIn that's relevant to some interview that you did, I would read the post, comment on the post, and then put the link to the interview and say like it's interesting you mentioned that because here's what somebody else said,
Right.
right? So if you do it elegantly and you do it where it's actually connected and it's not just like dumping links into chats, then you'll be
Hmm.
fine. And actually you'll be more than that is that people appreciate when they realize that you've read or listened to their content. So
Hmm.
reference the fact and reference something in that content to show that you have read it, because then I'm okay with the link after that because I know you actually took the time to read my content.
Yeah, definitely. So be part of the community, right?
Yeah,
Contribute to the
yeah,
community, not
yeah,
only getting there and just spamming and leaving, right? You need to be, again, for the long run, even in communities. You're
yeah.
also mentioning ads, YouTube ads. Is this something you've tried?
Yeah, sometimes we do occasionally when we have something that we really want to promote. But not on a very large scale. But it does work if you definitely it definitely works if you target it
Interesting.
correctly.
What does it mean to target it correctly?
Well, target it at your at the correct audience that you're looking for.
Okay.
Like go down into the demographics and everything like that, and make sure you're targeting the right audience. But generally speaking, I mean, I would steer clear of dumping lots of
Mm,
money into advertising and all that because you
right.
don't really need to. And until you reach a certain point of growth, there's no real point in it either.
Hmm. You also mentioned that your YouTube channel has been growing. Do you use shorts or only long form
Mhm.
videos?
No, we use both. We use shorts have been, and it's funny, demographic wise, it's like shorts in the US will completely outstrip everything else. You'll get
Hmm.
your biggest audience on shorts. Long form content tends to be divided up more amongst the globe. It's much more even, if you like. So yeah,
Right.
if you're not doing shorts, I would encourage you to do start doing shorts and leverage your content in multiple ways. Like for instance, like we do just the seasons just passed, we do like the 12 days of Christmas where we do 12 shorts taken out of interviews from the previous
Okay.
12 months and
Hmm.
release one a day over the 12 days of Christmas.
Hmm.
So yeah, I absolutely would recommend that you leverage shorts as
Hmm.
part of your strategy.
What is the best way to do a catchy short? Something that people want to listen and it, because my experience with shorts is that we release something, we get a bunch of views, and then it just dies
Mhm.
completely. Um, so first of all, does this also happen to you? And second, like, what is the best way to make a great catchy short?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you get drop off over time, but then again, sometimes some of our best performing content is from years ago. It just, it has a life. It doesn't. It,
Hmm.
it becomes evergreen in some ways. But for a catchy short, is make sure that it's one subject, if you like, or one insight or something contained in it, so that you watch that short,
Hmm.
you learned something from it or you were entertained by it or whatever, but just something, but keep it to one simple insight. So I would go
Okay.
in, I would take in something that one of the guests said that was particularly insightful, take that in, have the headings of the pop-ups, like emojis. I have a guy who does it for me, with emojis popping up, and just make it as engaging, as interesting as possible, because let's face it, I mean, shorts shorts are designed for a particular generation of people, if
Yeah.
you like, so you need to do both long form and short form, and
Hmm.
you need to make your shorts entertaining, because if they're not entertaining, they're going to be
Okay.
scroll past.
That's a very good point. Try to be focused, try to be entertaining.
Yeah.
My struggle with shorts, though, is, people, because they are short, they you can scroll through multiples, like in
Mhm.
in a minute you scroll through, maybe, I don't know, five or so,
Yeah.
depending on. So how do you connect that with your podcast? Because I'm going it throughout so fast that I don't even know, okay, what was that? It was like, what kind of podcast was that? How do you bring them back then, and convert them to be a listener?
Yeah, so just make sure that in your short there's plenty of branding as well, and that it's quite obvious where it's coming from, and in the script. But yeah, I would say, make sure you have good branding on your shorts.
How does one do that?
Well, I mean, make sure your logo is there. Make sure they know where it's come from. Make
Mm.
sure there's some at the end of the short, that there's something there that they can see,
Hmm.
to make sure that they remember it. But I would say mostly like make sure you're not just putting a short up. Make sure you're putting up a branded one. It's got emojis pop. It's got some interaction going. It's entertaining, but it's
Yeah,
got your branding, front and center, so that people start to
engraved.
go, oh, because if you look at the most successful shorts out there, they always have their brand in the background somewhere.
Yeah, that's true. And even in this example, right? You have your brand in the background, right? So that's also good when you
Yeah.
go guest on a podcast and so on. We don't have our branding, which is a mistake, right? We need to get something here saying
You
like,
need to get your branding going. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And it's not difficult at all, like to build something. I mean, you can put virtual backgrounds in or anything.
yeah.
My background is actually a real one,
Hmm.
just in case people are wondering.
Go there
And
and actually destroy it so that we can see.
yeah, 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 yeah. So it's yeah.
Mhm.
So I mean, it's important, and just and yeah, and if you can do something interesting, like get an interesting environment for yourself, or if you're going to use a
Mm.
virtual background, then get a designer, go on Fiverr or Upwork, and get a designer to
Yeah.
design you a really good like custom background for yourself.
Hmm. Yeah, that's. I think we just got great, amazing tips from you. So thank you for sharing that, John. As a last question, um, first of all, again, tell us the name of your podcast again. Where can we listen to it? And if you could pick one episode for people to start listening, what would that episode be and why?
Wow, that's a tough question. Where they can find it is they can find salespop.net. They can find us on YouTube under Salespop and on all of the podcasting platforms under Salespop. That's Salespop with an exclamation point at the end. Um, wow, what's a good episode to start with? That's a really really tough question
Or
to
a
ask. I've
memorable
done it.
moment and an episode where you have learned a lot, something that like anyone that is starting with sales needs to listen to that one,
Mm.
something in that
I have a
direction.
great one for entrepreneurs. Actually, there's a podcast from one of the original founders of Starbucks, one of the
Oh,
people who actually set up Starbucks. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but I'll send you the link. You can put it below the
yeah.
this podcast. But yeah, one of the original founders of Starbucks, because it's a very interesting podcast because he talks about how close they came to disaster in the early days
Ooh.
and how they nearly went out of business and how they were saved by crowdsourcing some local customers of their first coffee shop. And so it's a very, very interesting
Wow.
because obviously it's a brand that everybody knows. Another one I would definitely recommend is that one from the guy who was the last off the plane
Oh yeah.
when it ditched on the Hudson. He was literally the last passenger off of that plane.
How is that related to sales though?
Because it's related to motivation and it's related
Mm,
to because he completely changed, his whole life changed after that, and it became so it's motivation because at the end of the day, motivation and sales go hand in hand because
mm,
if you can't motivate yourself, if you can't get the best out of yourself, you can't sell. So they're very linked, and that's why I like to link a lot of not just say, oh, here's a sales tip. No, here's some ways of getting your mindset right.
hmm. John, I want to listen to those episodes now. I think you just gave great two examples, and I will link them in the show notes. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us.
All right, thanks, Tiago. Appreciate it.
This podcast is brought to you by Podsqueeze, an essential tool for podcasters that creates show notes, timestamps, clips, and more. Visit podsqueeze.com and use the code PODCASTER for 20% discount in the first 3 months. We release a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday. See you in the next episode of Lessons from a Podcaster.